in December of 2022. And what I think what the act wants to do is, I think Congress understands that right now selling carbon credits in private voluntary carbon markets is not a super deal for most producers today. Maybe for some, but by and large, not so much. But they think that it's something that is going to be important in the future as we all get more serious about trying to drive greenhouse gas emissions down, and carbon dioxide being the largest by percent of CO2 gas that's emitted, that's leading to the global warming and all the crazy weather that we're experiencing and so forth. They think that these carbon markets are something that will become more and more important as time goes on. So with the bill that was passed and signed by the president, they're going to do two things. They are going to establish a USDA website for who I refer to as carbon market consultants, so that if I'm in York County and I want to find somebody in York County who can help me with, I'm going to start using cover crops in my operation, or at least I want to consider that. And I want to see if that can get me anything on the carbon market. I'll look to see if there are consultants in my area who can help me with that. And that's the hope that, that's the service that the website will provide once it's up and running. And then in addition, USDA will be providing educational materials, to help producers better understand, what carbon markets are, how they work, and what are the roles and the services that these carbon consultants can provide. And so feeling that if farmers understand carbon markets better, they'll be in a better position to figure out, well, is this something that can be beneficial for me? And if so, what are the kinds of things that I need to do to be able to jump in and participate? In addition, right now, there are no national regulations of carbon emissions in the United States, and I don't expect that to change anytime soon. Certainly no regulation of agricultural carbon emissions, although that is certainly one thing that ag producers are concerned about, and legitimately so, because there are a lot of groups who would like to do that if they could, but they're not in charge, so they can't. But there are some international and national developments going on, both with the United Nations and also the Security and Exchange Commission, that both will have the effect of kind of scrutinizing the use of these ag carbon credits in the voluntary private carbon markets, and probably tightening up how these carbon credits are evaluated over time. And so that will be one big thing. And then the Securities and Exchange Commission, in addition, will also look at requiring corporations whose shares are traded on the US stock exchange on Wall Street. They will begin to have to start reporting their greenhouse gas emissions, and that goes, and the current proposal, it would go all the way through the so-called Scope 3 emissions, but that would be all the supply chain emissions up and down. So if I'm a food company and my shares are traded on the New York Stock Exchange, Walmart or McDonald's or whoever it might be, under this proposed Securities and Exchange regulation, I may have to start reporting on greenhouse gas emissions, including from farmers who supply me with livestock or crops or other types of the inputs into the food supply. So this is one straw that's in the wind so far, but there are other things that it could hook up with as well. And so this is definitely something that I think producers need to be aware of and not get behind on. Okay, now I'm going to talk briefly about carbon emissions. And remember, excuse me, remember that the purpose of these carbon markets is to reduce carbon emissions, whether it's, in the United States or if it's in Nebraska or, wherever this is occurring. And so these carbon markets are supposed to try to find a less expensive way to reduce carbon emissions, but the fundamental mission of the carbon market is to, provide payments for practices that will drive greenhouse gas emissions within the United States, drive those emissions down over time. And so that's the fundamental thing to bear in mind as we go throughout this discussion this afternoon. Now, there are two types of carbon markets. There are the regulatory carbon markets, and then there are the voluntary markets. And the ag carbon credits are the voluntary markets, but the regulatory markets were around first, and they are the ones that are really hardcore about reducing emissions. And this is what they have in the European Union, where there are limits on greenhouse gas emissions from power plants or from industry. And even in a few states, they're looking at reducing carbon emissions in livestock production and in agriculture more generally, which has created some stir within the EU. But and so as part of the regulatory process, if I'm a power plant in California that uses coal or natural gas, whatever it might be, and I have greenhouse gas emissions when I generate electricity, I am allowed to purchase certified carbon credits that have been certified by this regulatory program to count towards part of my reduction. And I think maybe in California, it's up to like 5%. And so I can buy carbon credits from forestry projects that have been certified to reduce greenhouse gas emissions so much over the next 40 years. And I can purchase those and use those to help meet my greenhouse gas emission output reductions. That may be cheaper than using cleaner coal or putting in scrubbers or more advanced air pollution control technology or not running as much coal and doing more wind and solar, that type of thing. And not only are the emissions regulated, but these credits are also regulated. And the project has to go, the offset project has to go through a fairly intense review process to get the analysis done to say, okay, over 40 years, this is going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by however many tons. Let's say it's 2,000 tons. Then they would be certified for 2,000 tons that they could offer to sell on the exchange. And so if I'm a power plant that needs to come up with some emission reductions quickly, that's one place that I may look as a place to if I've generated too many greenhouse gas emissions, I can buy some of these carbon credits and stay legal with the program. And these are the certification of these emissions is hard to get, but they've forest projects have been certified, livestock projects, methane capture projects where they capture the methane emissions from the manure and use that to generate electricity for use in the livestock production facility. Those have been certified and carbon emissions carbon offsets have been sold off of them too. And carbon offsets and carbon credits are basically the same kind of thing. But the evaluation process is expensive. I mean, it's several $1,000s on up, depending on what kind of project it is. So one farmer, with maybe 5 tons to sell over 10 years, is not going to get enough to pay $5,000 to have their carbon credit certified for this regulatory market. And that brings us to the regulatory market, or the voluntary market. And this is, I think of it as the feel-good carbon market. These credits are not strong enough or well enough defined and verified to be able to qualify for sale on the regulatory markets, but they are purchased by often, or usually, big corporations who want to, in their advertising, be able to say that they are becoming carbon neutral, or that they're halfway to being carbon neutral, or whatever it is. And they do a lot of things. They make sure that all the electricity that they buy is wind or solar, all that kind of stuff. But they have also bought some carbon credit, on these voluntary markets, because they're not required to reduce their emissions, but they want to do it either for environmental PR, or because they're sincere in terms of their concern about global warming, and they want to be seen as leaders, corporate leaders, in terms of doing the right things to, reduce carbon emissions and to try to slow down global warming. But these voluntary markets, if you've heard me talk about this before, they're the wild, wild west. There's no requirements, no standards. The companies that are the consultants who, say want to aggregate grassland credits in Nebraska or something like that, they do their own verification typically. So, they can put their finger on the scale or take their finger off the scale or whatever. There's no real, star seal of approval that these are honest to goodness carbon credits that represent real world carbon emission reductions that will show up when EPA estimates the annual, carbon reduction of greenhouse gas emissions that it does every year for the United Nations. One problem that farm and ranch carbon credits have is that their carbon reductions are often only temporary, not necessarily permanent. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a later slide. The prices are much lower, maybe only 10 or 15% of what they would be in the regulatory markets. And so, that's the standard to which the ag carbon markets should aspire. But there's a big gap, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done before that can happen. And hopefully this new law will help with that. Okay, now the ag, and as far as what's happening in the ag, on the ag side, some farmers are selling these, but again, this is the PR purchases, or the purchases that to say that, at least on paper, we're reducing our carbon footprint. And it's, but it's a market that is not subject to regulation or supervision. When farmers talking about this, they want to know how much are they going to get, and who knows? I mean, these prices are not reported anywhere. If you talk to one of these aggregators, one of these ag carbon companies, they may tell you how much they got per ton, the last time they sold some to somebody. But, in Nebraska, a row crop producer, if they do cover crops or something like that, it may take several acres to generate one new ton of carbon sequestration. So, if they get $15 or $20 a ton, if you're spreading that over five or 6 acres, that's not a big chunk of money. But to try to help producers better understand it, the ag carbon credit market, and who knows, it's going to become more transparent. But ideally, it would. That's the law finally got passed, and it was a little bit. It kind of popped out of nowhere. I had sort of given up hope for it passing, but then there, right at the end, after Christmas, or right around Christmas, it passed. Okay, well, what kind of help do ag producers and the ag carbon credit market need to make this market more robust and worth more farmers and ranchers participating in? Well, we've got it's real tough in terms of measurement and verification of ag carbon credit, of ag carbon storage. Traditionally, the way we would measure, carbon content in the soil would be through soil sampling and analysis. And, that's just too expensive to be cost effective in terms of what these ag carbon credits can sell for in today's market. So, there's different companies are using different models. USDA has a model called Comet Farm. And if you Google Comet Farm, and it'll take you to the website, and you can estimate what putting cover crops in or going from conventional till to no-till on your farm, how much additional carbon that those changes in your production practices would generate, and give you some idea in terms of how many carbon credits would you have maybe to sell over a 5-year contract or something like that. So but the measurement and verification is a big issue. And, if there are ways to calibrate the models, through selective, soil sampling and whatever, that is something that may make these ag carbon credits more credible in the regulatory carbon markets. But, there's a ways to go, and we're not there yet. Another issue is additionality, and mostly that means that you've got to implement something different. You've got to change your practice in order, and then you can only get credit not for the total carbon that you sequester, but just for the additional amount that you sequester over what you would have done if you hadn't made the change from conventional till to limited till or no till, for example. You've got to, you've got that additional practice is needed in order to qualify for most of the in most of the ag carbon programs. Not all of them. Some of them will pay you for, if you've been doing no till for 10 years, they'll pay you for no till, but that's the exception, not the rule. And then the last one, and I think the really tough one, is permanence, because in the regulatory markets, these carbon reductions need to be long term. Ideally, they're forever, but if they're in there for at least 40 years, that seems to be like the minimum that you need in these regulatory markets. Some may work, for 20 instead of 40 or something like that, but 40 is a good benchmark in terms of how long it needs to be in there. And one issue that we have on the ag side is for cropland. If I go from conventional till to no till, and I'm in a 5 or 10 year contract for ag carbon credits, after my contract is up, the way it is now with most contracts is that I can go in and plow up my field and then, release all that carbon into the air, not just the additional carbon that was saved from going to no-till, but the other the other carbon that I put in there through crop production and everything else. So it's tough. That's a tough issue. And okay, so how is the act going to try to address this? Well, they're going to this new program. They're going to list the consultants or provide an opportunity for consultants to list themselves, and and that's the big end product, is to have that website where you can go and find somebody to help you if you want to sell carbon credits into the private voluntary market. Okay, and then these are four that come out of the law. The help producers participate in the markets, figure out ways to help them overcome barriers to entry, and that's what these aggregators are trying to do. They get dozens and dozens, or maybe even hundreds of farmers into this one group, and then they sell 500 carbon credits off of these hundreds of farmers, something like that. That's one example of what they're trying to do now. Try to make sure that producers receive a fair share of the revenue from the sales, and that they understand up front, what their share of the revenue is going to be, so there's no surprises, and then help producers better understand how these markets work and what the consultants do. Okay, and the timeline kind of gives you an idea of how long it's going to take to roll this out. And one of the challenges we have is that USDA is, going to be working real hard in terms of the 2023 or 2024 farm bill, whichever it ends up to be. That's going to be debated in Congress, and so that's going to require a lot of USDA attention. But under the bill, these are kind of pretty close to the deadlines for the different steps in the process. The first one is a carbon market study that what are the issues with the ag carbon credit market? Why aren't more farmers in it? Who are the people who will want to buy these things? How many bought them in the last 4 years? How many do we think will want to buy them in the next 4 years? Under the right circumstances, how many of these carbon credits might farmers be willing to offer in the next 4 years? How many do they offer back 4 years? All of that kind of stuff. Great study for people like me, but it's pretty technical. But it will be the report that USDA will use to determine whether to establish the carbon market program or not. Now, if they don't establish the carbon market program, I'll be stunned. I'm thinking everybody will be stunned. But this study will give them, it will give them marching orders in terms of, here are the things that we need to try to fix or try to help see if we can nudge the market in a more positive direction for farmers and ranchers and that. Okay, so then that's this September. So it's it's a ways off, but it's a big report. They'll need the time to do it. Then by October, the secretary has to decide whether there's a program or not. Then in December, December or January, the secretary will establish the oversight council and get people to be on it, and we'll go through that quickly. Then in January of next year, January or February, the USDA comes up with these standards for somebody who wants to be listed as a ag carbon consultant. If they're going to be on the sort of the ag production side, what are the qualifications that they need to have? If they're going to be on the measurement and verification side, what are their different qualifications? And then later that spring, the Oversight Council does its own carbon market study, and it will have some carbon market consultants on the council, as well as farmers and ranchers and forest landowners and land grant reps and stuff like that. But so they may have some response to the report that USDA and EPA did the previous fall. But then October or thereabouts in 2024, the website will be up, and people, the consultants who want to be listed on it, will have that opportunity to get on that website. Okay, I've really talked about the high points in terms of what the study is going to look at, but it's basically looking at what are the problems that farmers have, and a wide range of problems. And this is why it's going to take USDA a while to get through all of this stuff. But it's identified all the problems that ag carbon credits would have if they were going to be on the regulatory carbon market. And so it says, all right, what are these problems? Are they, what can be done to try to bridge the gap between, the current ag carbon credit process and what that process needs to be if those carbon credits are ever going to graduate into being part of the regulatory carbon market. And so it's not that USDA can fix carbon markets, but they can identify things that need to be addressed, through research, through better modeling, through better information gathering, whatever it is, things that can help improve the accuracy with which the ag carbon credits can be quantified, and then make them more attractive to that regulatory carbon market. Okay, the advisory committee, that's important, and they oversee the program to list the two groups of the ag carbon consultants. The first one, I call them the ag side, or the ag production side. They're the technical assistance providers, and they're the ones who work with the farmers to try to say, yes, you need to do cover crops or reduce tillage or whatever it happens to be. And if you do that, then then there will be some carbon credits that we can help you sell. Then that's the first group. Then the second group is the third-party verifiers. Sometimes they are in-house to the technical assistance providers, but the law puts them in a separate category and wants them to be independent, and ideally. And their job is to say, okay, here's what you've done on your farm, and you're promising that you're going to do it for so many years, or you've done it for so many years, and now you want to sell them. We're going to do the modeling, and we're going to go through all the calculations and stuff that your carbon consultant has provided to us, and we're going to look at the soil sample results and everything else, and we're going to determine how many tons you actually stored, because these carbon credits trade in tons, metric tons actually. So, but those are the two groups, the two list of carbon consultants, and maybe one of the impacts of the act will be to maybe separate the verification process from the ag side. Okay, a majority of the committee members are farmers, ranchers, or private forest owners. 51% have to be, but there's also these carbon market professionals, probably on both sides, on the verification side, but also on the ag production side. Land grant universities, private consultants, maybe outside of the ag carbon market system, and so forth. And then they do their own evaluation of the ag carbon markets and what can be done to make them easier for ag producers to participate in, and hopefully to make it more rewarding, financially rewarding for ag producers to participate in them. Okay, so here's the consultants, the slide on that, but the technical assistance providers, but again, they are, in my opinion, they're the ag, on the ag production side. What are the changes that you can do that can increase the rate of carbon storage on your farm? And then how can we get that additional carbon that you've stored into the carbon markets? And then the verifiers are the ones who will quantify how many carbon credits have actually been generated. And this is kind of a big change because right now it's the technical assistance providers, they do their own quantification and verification. And there a lot of the verification that's occurring on the ag carbon side is not independent. It's a one-stop shop, and they do all of it. And so the way the act is set up, they really see these as being separate categories and maybe even separate entities, separate legal entities. And so if that's the way it turns out, that would really be a big step in the direction of the process to making ag carbon credits more credible for these larger credit markets. Okay, here the next two slides are a laundry list of they're page after page in the law of the different practices that are potentially carbon credit generating practices in ag and forestry. I'm just going to kind of hit the high points. On the crop side, cover crops is a big deal. Reduced tillage is a big deal. Fertilizer management and reduced fertilizer use is also a big deal. Those are all things that in certain programs can qualify for payments. Thank goodness NRCS conservation practices are also in there, so that's good, and hopefully the carbon credit market will find a way to add some financial incentives for producers to engage in those. Then there's emission reductions, and this could be from reduced fuel use, reduced tillage, that's reduced tractor time, in going through the fields and so forth. On-farm energy generation, that's more the livestock side, but that's all right. Fertilizer reductions, I've already mentioned. Then livestock, emission reductions from feed changes or from feed additives, but also the methane capture and generating electricity off of that is another big one on the livestock side. And again, those credits are sold in some of the regulatory carbon markets. So they are ones that are command a much higher price per ton. And then other practices that would be proposed by the USDA and accepted by the advisory committee. Okay, protocols. One of the words that is used a lot in ag carbon discussions is protocols. That basically means standards or requirements. And so they want the USDA to publish all the different standards that are used by the technical systems providers on the ag side. So it's cover crop protocols, for example, or no-till protocols, for example, and then also on the measurement and verification. So and there are a lot of different models out there for trying to calculate how many ag carbon credits have been generated through these different practices. But they'll need to inventory all of those and list all the different ones, and so that when people go on the website, they can say, yes, I want to be listed for cover crops, and I want to be listed for eastern Nebraska, for example. And if I'm a third-party verifier, I say yes. One of the things that we do is verify carbon sequestration from cover crops, and here's the process. And here's the processes that we follow in terms of verifying those carbon savings from those cover crops. Okay, this is the biggest change from the original Senate bill passed in 2020 and the final bill. The Senate bill would have made basically USDA kind of the Securities and Exchange Commission for ag carbon credit market participants, and that where that they would have been either on the ag side or on the verification side. You basically have to pass a USDA test in order to get onto the USDA website. And so I call that the Better Business Bureau approach. So in order to get the Better Business Bureau seal of approval, you would have to take the test, pass the test, and then you could, for whatever you passed, whatever exam you took, you could be on the USDA listing for that. USDA apparently had some reservations about that. They were uncomfortable with that role, I think, and so the final bill takes what I call the yellow pages approach, where if you if you meet some basic requirements and you haven't just gotten out of jail for fraud or something like that, then you can be listed and saying, yes, I'm a carbon market professional, and here are the services that I provide, and here are the regions of the country where I make those services available. And so that's a big difference, but the listing will still be very useful for farmers, because hopefully there'll be more than one carbon program in your vicinity, and so you can shop around for the best deal, for who you're the most comfortable working with, all that kind of stuff, but the website is going to be this Yellow Pages model, not the Better Business Bureau. However, USDA is going to be very interested in terms of how these folks do, because they're supposed to be honest. They're supposed to make certain disclosures in terms of, here's how we split the fees. We get paid so much for our work, and then you get the rest, and this is how that shakes out. And so you get something fairly specific in terms of, if we sell them for this amount, this is what you're going to clear on it. And USDA, I'm sure that there will be, the website will have the opportunity, if I felt that I wasn't fairly treated by somebody on the website, they said they were going to do this, I ended up doing something else. I have a chance to complain about them to USDA. I mean, and this is very popular with all the online shopping, where you rate shop, or the people you buy stuff from, and all of that stuff. So the USDA will be very interested in producer experience with these people, and if producers are having a bad experience, USDA is going to want to know. They're going to run it down, they're going to check it out, and if people are not following the rules, they could kick them off the website, and if somebody gets kicked off the website, then they have to notify all of their contacts that they've been kicked off the website, and so and USDA will likely be doing sampling as well. They'll be auditing a few programs every year, or in every state every year, something like that. And so that's I think that's how that will probably work, and I think that'd be a really, really useful tool for producers who are interested in finding out about their carbon credit opportunities in their neighborhood. In addition, USDA should have a suite of informational materials about, if you want to do cover crops for, here's for carbon credits, here's how that works. If you want to do reduced tillage for carbon credits, here's how that works. For all these different practices, there's probably going to be some kind of information sheet. There's probably going to be, overview information sheets about, here's how carbon markets work. Here's the different parties. Here's who are buying these carbon credits. Here's what they're looking for in these carbon credits. And all of that kind of stuff. So that if producers are willing to put a little time in, then they can, educate themselves. And those, of course, those materials can be used by people like myself and others in extension, whatever, in terms of helping producers understand more about carbon markets, and so that it's easier for folks to participate. Now, there are some built-in producer protections, and all the listed providers, they have to be acting in good faith, basic honesty. As a requirement, they have to be realistic in terms of their estimates of costs and revenues, so that the farmers understand that they're not going to get $1 million a ton. They're going to get a few dollars a ton, maybe $5 or $10 a ton. Maybe more than that. Who knows? But and that producers get a fair share of the revenues from the carbon credits, and that's I would suspect that anybody who wants to work with farmers in terms of ag carbon credits is going to be on that USDA website. Maybe there's some people who don't do it for whatever reason, but I would guess that the vast majority of carbon consultants, ag carbon consultants, are going to be on that website, and it'll, it's an easy way to basically advertise, and so a good way to get some exposure. Okay, at the very beginning, I mentioned that there's a chance that this may be this relates to some other climate reporting kinds of programs that are under development. And the first one is something that came out of, well, I can't remember which city it was held in, but I think it was the one that was in the Nordic states in Europe. Anyway, the United Nations has begun work on developing an international carbon market, and that's I may be pushing up daisies by the time that comes about. So it's some time into the future, but it is. But that is something that they believe would help reduce greenhouse gas emissions globally by providing a market where people who have the opportunity to do that can get paid to do that by selling their carbon credits in this market. But it's going to be a regulatory market. It's not going to be a voluntary market. So there's going to be, you're going to have to go through the process to get things verified, and it's going to have to be accurate measurement. There's probably going to be requirements that if you're, for example, you're getting carbon credits for reduced tillage, you'll have to commit to not tearing that land up within the next 20 years, maybe, or something like that. And well, so that's a big thing to watch. It's going to take a while. It's not going to be happening, but maybe in 5 years from now, maybe there'll be some, maybe we'll be getting close enough to some convergence or consensus on how that ought to operate, so that it's something that we can talk about. But that's where it's going. But it's not next year. It's a ways down. Then the other big one, is the Securities Exchange Commission, who regulates stock trading and bond trading in the United States. They're doing a couple things. They proposed a regulation that would first, tighten up these carbon-friendly claims that corporations make as part of their advertising, as well as their disclosure to shareholders and stuff. And in addition, this would include these corporations reporting greenhouse gas emissions from their supply chain, not, certainly their own, the energy they consume, the energy they buy, whatever emissions might happen as a result of their operations, say if they're a chemical company or something, some fertilizer company, something like that. But it would also include these Scope 3 emissions. And, a lot of corporations already report the so-called Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, but hardly anybody does the Scope 3. And that's, that's the entire supply chain. And for food companies, that would include crops and livestock products. And so, if that comes about and the ag groups are opposing that, they're pushing back pretty hard on that because they, but I could see that this is something that could happen in stages, that where they, they'll come up with estimates that would be kind of default, so for corn production, there's going to be a default, greenhouse gas emissions associated with a bushel of corn, for example, or with, a 100 weight of pork or whatever it might be. And they'll be kind of a default. And again, this is just something that I'm making up. If I'm saying, if I were trying to do it and I wanted to get this thing started, what would be the first step? Well, these kind of default things that, that are probably used by EPA in measuring the annual emissions from the US, and then where do they come from? You start out with those default things, and then giving people the opportunity to say, well, I don't generate that many emissions in mine, and I can prove it, or whatever. It might be something like that. But clearly the ag piece of it is going to be something that is contentious, and whether they might say do scope 1, scope 2, and we need to do some more study on how to structure the scope 3 reporting requirements so that it doesn't create an impossible burden or cost, people in the pipeline chain a ton of money to hire a consultant to tell them what their emissions are, which is, the big complaint and it's a legitimate concern on the ag side. The bottom line from both of these things is that there's more and more interest in terms of carbon emissions from the ag sector. And, President Biden has said he wants the United States, his goal is for the US to be net carbon neutral by 2050. That means agriculture being carbon neutral, as well as industry and energy and transportation and, everything else. So there's going to be more efforts to try to estimate these or to calculate these, and then try to figure out ways to bring them down. And nobody's, I don't think, thinking about regulating them down, but looking at things like the carbon markets and stuff like this to try to do that. Looking at different, Walmart might have some kind of incentive thing for livestock producers whose greenhouse gas emissions are better than the default for livestock production, something like that. But this is happening right now. I mean, and if former President Trump or somebody with the same climate attitudes as former President Trump gets elected president, say in the next presidential election, 2024, I think, they say, well, we're pulling out of the UN, we're pulling out of the Paris climate agreement. We're not going to be involved in any of this, and we're pulling the plug on the SEC climate reporting requirements for corporations. We're doing all that. That clearly could happen. I mean, it kind of already happened once, and it could happen again. But this is something that is, the rest of the world is going to be doing it. Hopefully we're going to be doing it too. Nobody really knows the best way to handle the ag stuff. And so I see a real potential, especially that first USDA study where they're going to be studying, the issues with ag carbon markets and stuff. They're going to have an opportunity to really identify how should we, as people or as groups who are trying to reduce these over time, reduce these ag carbon emissions. How are the ways that we can look at how do we quantify this? How do we, what are the practices or activities that can help reduce the emissions, increase the sequestration, all of that stuff. that's something, when that first report is issued, the SEC and the United Nations are both going to take a really hard look at it to see if there's stuff in there that can help them with their job, because most of them are probably struggling or floundering in terms of how do we deal with these ag stuff? How do we deal with these ag emissions and credits and everything else? Because it's hard. It's not clear cut about how to do that. And so, it's going to be an issue. And I think that that the USDA has the opportunity to do some leadership, provide some leadership in this, and leadership that could be constructive. Okay, I think that is. I'll stop for now, and hopefully there's a little time for some questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dave, as always, for staying on top of the legal side of things, policy side of things, and especially when it comes to ag carbon markets. We do have at least one question to get to so far. Reminder that if you have a question for Dave, now is the time to enter that in the chat or in the Q&A panel, and we'll work on addressing those here before our hour is up. And before you go, please do click on that link that I've put in the chat pane for a short evaluation of today's webinar, and especially to let us know if there are any topics you would like to hear about on future webinars. We do these every week at the Center for Ag Profitability, and we want to make sure we're hitting issues that are important to you. So we really value your feedback in that short questionnaire there. So Dave, question is, does the carbon credit market assume that there is an absolute linear relationship between emissions and climate change? And then hence, how is the value of a carbon credit calculated?
Okay, very interesting question. I am not an economist. Most of the time I'm happy about that. But here's how I think an economist would try to explain it, and I think it's a good way to approach it. Basically, in the regulatory carbon markets that we have now, I'm still using a coal-fired generation plant in New York or California, where these I'm subject to regulation on my emissions, and I have engineering costs of what it would take me to reduce those emissions from a bunch of things, fuel substitution, increased, put in more air pollution control equipment to try to reduce some of those emissions, bring in substitute electricity from wind or solar or batteries, to cut down on the amount that I need to generate with coal or natural gas. So I've got all these options, and they've all got costs. Well, one of the other things I look at is, if I wanted to go and buy one of these certified, stamp of approval approved carbon credits in the regulatory market that are going to be pretty, $150, $200 a ton, something like that. Looking at a whole range of things, what is my least cost option for doing that? And it could be, so it's going to depend on, what options I have, what their associated costs are, and compare that to the cost of getting some carbon credits out of the carbon market and the carbon offset market. And so, that's how those prices are determined. It's a market price. It is not tied to the so-called cost of carbon or anything like that. The cost of carbon is something that tries to capture the cost of each ton of carbon in terms of the pain, the climate change pain that we suffer as a result of that. But there's, it's not that kind of a deal. It's, what are these things selling for? And if a bunch of certified forestry carbon credits come onto the market all at once, that's like that increased supply is likely going to drop the price for these carbon credits. And so I may be able to pick them up a little cheaper, and that may make them look a little better. And I may be more willing to pull the trigger on them rather than, using low sulfur coal or whatever my other options might be.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. We did have a couple more questions come in. We'll get to quickly. I also want to point out now might be a good time to do this. In the chat box, I just put another link to the ag carbon resources available on our center's website there at cap.unl.edu/carbon. Our faculty in the center have been working on this for a long time, including Dave. So you'll find lots of his resources and other things there that can be helpful. So Dave, next question is, will there be some guidelines or procedures provided that a consultant might use in estimating carbon credits for various practices?
Absolutely, yes. That's one thing you can take to the bank. So that, that's what these protocols are that they will come up with. And it'll be for that whole laundry list of all the different practices. Each practice is going to have its own protocol. Some of the protocols may be related, because they're involve similar, agronomic or ag production practices or whatever. But, that is a big job that they will have to do. But it is very high on the list of the things that will come out of this and that Congress expects to come out of this.
Great, thank you. And what looks to be our last question here for the hour. How do you think grasslands and pastures will be treated in the carbon programs compared to row crops in terms of additionality? And then which international countries are leaders in carbon programs and their key characteristics, if you have any insight on that? So two-part question for you. Okay,
the first one is, grasslands and pasture are definitely in there. They will be in there for they will get their own protocols and everything else, so they will be treated just like, cover crops or reduced fertilizer application or something like that. They will all be in there, NRCS and ARS have a lot of work to do, but they will be trying to generate all the information so that all of these practices can be, looked at and maybe kind of looked at on a consistent basis in terms of what's, what's their potential in terms of additionality and all of that sort of stuff. Okay, what countries? The European Union is the leader. They have an EU carbon program. They are tinkering with it all the time. But it's the one that seems to be the most robust. And if that would, if I was going to try to find out what are they doing in the rest of the world as far as carbon markets, I would look at the EU as the European Union as the one.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much for the questions today and for attending our webinar. Dave, thank you very much as well for the great presentation. And we'll post the recording and Dave's slides for this. It should be up by tomorrow afternoon, I would suspect, on our website at cap.unl.edu. Again, you can find that on that carbon page that I posted in the chat a little bit ago. It'll also be in the webinar archive. Next week, we'll be back with another webinar on the growing role of government and government programs in livestock markets. And you can register for that, of course, on our website as well. So with that, thank you again for attending. And Dave, thank you, and hope everybody has a great rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, Ryan.